Let's do some more error handling, or really some error handling. As I mentioned in the challenge, this would be like if you want to try it yourself, cool. We've done some already, but in this case, because we're using fetch, we're going to handle it differently than we did when we coded the promise. Okay, because our promise allowed us to reject and handle those errors and send back. But this time, because we're using async await, we're going to do it differently, but we're still going to use a try catch. But let's first dive into this response object if you didn't already when you wrote the code. Because in this case, when you look at this in the console, right, when you look at the response object, there's a lot you see, but there's some really important things like we have this OK on the object itself. So on the object, we have an OK. So we could check to see if this is not OK. By the way, where this gets set is based on the status code. If it's like a 400, and this is HTTP status, so if you've taken any other web classes, like specifically maybe an 85 or an 82, where you actually learned about when this conversation between your browser and the server happens, there's these codes that get sent back and forth. And so this allows us, and in this case, the response object based on a 200, which is successful, sets that so we can just say, hey, if that is okay, or if it's not okay, let's actually do something, okay? So you'll see this in what we're about to do, and then it does give us some status text, but because of the way this response object is, we also need to call an await on it and pull off the pieces of the text that we want. So let's go ahead and just code that up now, okay? So the first thing here is we're actually going to do not a capital, we're going to do a try, okay? So now we're going to do what? We're going to do this code in the try block, right? So this is what we want you to try. I typically can do this now or when I've finished, and then when you have an error, which we are going to actually throw, you'll see this idea of throwing an error. We created a new error. Now we're actually going to throw an error. We're going to do it ourselves, to where in this case when we were calling reject, that's kind of the equivalent on the promise side. So what are we going to do here? So in this case we're going to say if not response dot okay. So on the response object, if it's not okay, there's something happened. We're actually in this case, and I have this comment on the instruction, and you just put it in here, and this is what I was talking about before. We're going to throw a descriptive error if the status is not successful. Okay, 200 through 299. And in that case, I was showing you the status is what sets that property on there. So then we'll say const, and we'll set up a variable that has that text, and we have to actually await, like I said before, the response dot, not this, dot text, okay? So this just actually does that same. It's going to take a little bit of it's an async function, so it takes a little bit of time just to pull that off. Not a lot, but we still need to do it. But in this case, we're actually going to throw. So now in this case, it's the first time we've seen the throw. So we're saying, hey, throw a new error. It's like throwing a flag on the player. We're going to say new error. Okay, and I think I actually gave you, so let's actually pull it off of here just so, and we can, allows us just to actually talk about it. Okay, so we're going to say, hey, give me the status code, the actual status itself. What was that error message coming back? And then also put the text, right? So whatever came back and stored in the text. And if not, if this is, if this is not in, just throw unknown API error. So this just gives more descriptive text to the error itself. Okay, so now we have to do the corresponding. What are we going to do when we catch? Because this is going to throw the error, so now we've got to catch it. Okay, so we're in this case, right? We've defined the error. We know what the error is stored in catch. So let's and in this case, this is a little different. This is something called console.error. Okay, so this is actually something we haven't seen before. We've been using console log this whole time, but now we can pull and actually pull off the console. I was talking about this the other day, how we don't necessarily have programming context from the dev tools, but actually error is kind of a way we can get some content. So fetching AQI data, and there was some kind of error. Okay, so I'm going to say, hey, there was an error. All right. In this case, it says grab that off of there, and now we're going to throw an error here. So this now throwing this error allows us to actually, and you'll see this when we look at the output, have a nicely wrapped error that we can then give the, in this case, most likely the developer, because the user wouldn't look here, and we're not actually outputting this yet to the user. Failure to, I think I gave you this, fetch AQI data. And in this case, when we do this, yeah, we're actually going to inject this, okay? So we're actually going to say, hey, there's an error dot message, and this should look familiar because we've actually set this property on there. Okay, so now we're just creating this object so that we can then have more descriptive text. Okay, so that's all the coding we need to do. So if you don't have an OK, pull the text off of that response object. Let's throw a new error that gives us that HTTP or API error, and we'll show you how to see this in the console. Right? But in this case, assuming that it wasn't an error, it's going to go ahead and JSONify that, yeah, it is kind of JSONify that response and send it back. But in the case of the error, we're going to console log out something, and then we're going to throw one more error that will get sent back because it's in the catch block. Right? Remember what calls this is in the integrator. Okay, so let's actually, let me show you how to actually throw this error now. So what I've done is I've put my API key lower, and we could play with that as well, but you could do something as simple as just putting an X here. So if I come over to my code, and I'll just let this run. Let's see. Oh, good. So I'm here, right? So I'm going to do my response, right? So I can see in here that my response is false, so it's not okay. Okay, so now we're into the block. Let's actually kind of move this over a little bit. So now when we go here, we can roll over and see what it did is it said, hey, you have a code 404. That's your message, right? Message is internal error. So now this wraps that in, which is nice, right? So now when we come here, we know that then drops into the catch block. And we say, hey, grab that right here, right? And now we're going to throw a new error, right? And then when we come through here, then we'll get an error message. Actually, we will. That's right. We will get an error message here, which we're going to clean up the API, the UI with a little more. I'd forgotten that we did it here. That's right. Because in this case, if we just, and this is a good place to end here, is to think about the fact that this try catch in the integrator file, right? Because we're setting up that error message. If we get an error on the call here, it outputs, and if we on the geolocation, if we get an error on the fetch, we also output it here. But again, we will most likely, if I remember right, do some better content on that massage. Because look at this. I mean, this is not an error the user would understand, but at least for now, it gives us a little way to do that. So if you wanted to, right, you can, of course, take that back, and then you could also, on your API key, make one character difference and see what that is as well. So in this code along, we've just learned a little more about error, how to actually handle and throw errors in the terms of an API asynchronous call, and then send those customized descriptive messages back to what called it. All right, we'll move on. This will be the end of this one. Submit your URL for this one, and then just finish the AQI fetch.